Welcome back to the Never Iron Anything Comics Review Podcast, episode 167. This week we discuss an ancient Roman deity with a love for the debauched side of existence, just like my co-host. I'm joined by an old pal who described me once recently as Porthos, which I've decided to own, as well as a sharp wit. He's the host of the Megacity Book Club and a comics editor and essayist of note. Welcome back, Eamonn Clarke.
Hello, Tony. How you doing? Yes, 4 Musketeers we decided, didn't we? And you were cast as Porthos.
Yeah, it depends which one, but I'm going for it all. I think I'm owning it all now.
Okay. Yeah. The most reliable of the Musketeers, Porthos. Yeah.
I remember as a kid, but thoroughly believing that the 3 Musketeers and 4 Musketeers movies were made by the Carry On movie team, because they had that quality about them, didn't they?
They're very Carry On-ish, don't they? Yes.
Yeah.
And then they have don't the Musketeers movies, the Richard Donner ones, don't they have one of those horrible movie stories? Because what's his name?
Roy Kinnear died, didn't he?
Roy Kinnear died on a horse stunt, didn't he?
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Anyway.
But it did have Raquel Welch, of course.
Of course it did.
Yes, Raquel Welch.
Yeah, massive fan.
Yeah.
Hello.
Anyway,
good to have you on, man. How have you been?
I've been very well, thank you. Yeah, I've been keeping very busy doing absolutely nothing. I like the essayist.
Yeah.
I will write an essay one of these days. You never know.
You wrote one. You're in Madeline with me.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. That one.
You forgot that, didn't you?
I've forgotten about that. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yes. Our friend and mutual friend Simon Russell did a wonderful little volume called Madeline, Little Memories of Comics, and which he put together and illustrated and did all sorts of clever graphic design on.
Made our stupid essays look really good with like little illustrations and layouts and stuff like that, didn't you? I remember?
Yeah.
Yes, good egg.
Very nice.
Interestingly, I was thinking about him this morning. Not like that, Simon, but he's the one who introduced me to you at Lawless.
Oh, okay. There we go. Yeah. It's his fault.
Yeah. Right. That's the reason you get all these late night texts about volleyball competitions and things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're sending me pages from obscure comics that you have
I've been massively bothering you recently with those, haven't I?
Yeah.
I do send them to you. I do tend to send them to you about 9 o'clock. And I see you read them and I think, yeah, he hates me. He won't write back till tomorrow now. Good. Well, speaking of which, Eamonn, I think I approached you on this one, didn't I?
This was your pick this time, Tony?
Yeah.
This is yours.
Yeah. We've just this morning, as we record this, gone live with the Dylan Dog episode on your podcast, which is great fun. Really enjoyed that, man. And around the same time, I pitched to you as well this particular subject. And do you want to tell the listeners what we're talking about?
Today, Tony, we will be walking into a bar and talking about Bacchus, Volume 1 of the Omnibus collection by Eddie Campbell. And it is, we've both got the heavyweight omnibus in front of us. You've got some of the comics. We were both realising that the omnibus is now out of print.
Yes.
And getting hard to find. However, I know, because I've also got a Kindle Unlimited subscription, so they are digitally available as individual volumes. I think there's 5 individual volumes make up 2 omnibuy. And they're on the Kindle, and if you've got unlimited, you get them as part of your subscription, so you can get them that way as well. That's probably the quickest, most instant access to them, because as we say, the hardback's getting difficult to find, or rather the paperback.
The big chunky book, yeah.
I mean, it is a phone book.
Man, it is. You can't take it in your rucksack to work. It's not one of those books, definitely. I mean, this came from years ago. Now, this is completely my fault, as everything is. But I think I challenged you to read this. I'm going to say 2 years ago at least.
Yes, and we've been taking a run at this for a while.
Yeah, we have, and it's not because it's bad or anything. In fact, I've become fascinated by it. But it's because it's just sitting there. I have a little pile of unread trades and graphic novels and stuff by the door in my comic room, and it's just been staring at me, haunting me. And I know what you're like, because you're not a massive hoarder at the moment, are you? You tend to
try to divest of stuff. Yeah,
it goes in and out, doesn't it? You read it if you enjoy it and send it on to someone. And it just guilts me by staring back at me this massive 540 pages of the doorstop. And eventually we got round to it. We had one failed start because I hadn't got to it properly and written notes on it. But we did get to it eventually. Now let's just name check the other people involved, because there are a number of other people. So Ilya, aka Ed Hillier, is in it. He's probably the main collaborator in this volume. Steve Bissett, Phil Elliott, and Peter Mullins. We also see later in Steve Stamatiadis, Dylan Horrocks, I think he's in volume 2, Peter Mullins, April Post, and co-writer Darren White, who I know Eddie wrote some Batman with. I think he was a regular co-writer. And then a guy called Wes Kubrick, who was an academic, as I understand it, into the Greek myths and stuff.
Oh, okay, that would explain some stuff, right? Okay.
If you read the last, so each, what would be the original trade paperback has an essay of some kind, or extracts from interviews and stuff. I think one's from Comics Interview. They fell out. I think him and Eddie Campbell fell out over the scripting of one of the books. So I'm not sure how much he's in the second 500 pages of this.
Right.
So this is like we said, a massive tome. It's in all 1,000 pages that makes up the book Bacchus, and we've read the first half of that.
Yes.
It started at Harrier Comics in 1987, who we will discuss later. But I thought it might be interesting firstly just to get an overview of it from you. Don't please. It's 540 pages. Don't go in and out of the everything. I don't want to put that on you, Eamonn. But did you want to just give us an overview of what Bacchus is?
Okay, so Bacchus takes as its premise the fact that the Greek gods were real,
yeah,
and that some of the Greek gods are still around in the modern world, and they are, because they're Greek gods, they are still up to their usual habits, which are basically drinking, fighting, and screwing, it seems. The title character, Bacchus, also known as Dionysus, was, of course, the Greek god of wine and revelry.
Yes.
And in this book, he's a sort of old, one-eyed man. He has horns that he conceals beneath what looks like a sort of Greek fisherman's sea captain's cap.
That's what I took it to be. Yeah, it's a little bit a cross between that and what Jeremy Corbyn often wears.
Right.
That sort of cap. Do you know what I mean? That's how I take it. But yeah, definitely that fisherman's cap to me. Definitely, yeah.
And basically, Bacchus is in a lot of bars around the world. He starts off in a prison cell, which is also a place he seems to find himself in quite a lot. But he's in a lot of bars, telling a lot of stories. And there's an assorted cast of characters who will feature in some of the epics within this omnibus, and I presume in the second one as well.
Yeah, and also one of them had a sort of their own spin-off series.
Yes.
Yeah.
A breakout character. A rather peculiar one, but a breakout character nonetheless. Yeah.
Oh, so corporate, Campbell. You know, it's like I have to say my favourite character in this is Simpson.
Right. He introduces as my lawyer, doesn't he?
Yeah, but that sort of, I don't know. It may be. It's just, and a little. We'll talk about it in a bit, I guess, but a little bit beyond it, before his time, in one moment. So I looked up Bacchus, aka Dionysus. As we sit here and talk, we were swapping pictures of a man wearing a sort of blue body sock appearing at the French Olympics opening ceremony, being Dionysus. And you returned by saying, "Look, there's a man next to him with his bollock out." I believe you're too polite to say the word bollock, but that was essentially what happened. So
one of the supporting cast looked like he had a hole in his tights. Or that he just popped out for the French evening air, I think. Yeah,
yeah, long day. So we're proper fashionable, up to date, as we always are on these podcasts, Eamonn.
Yeah.
I looked up Bacchus. He is in Greek mythology. He is the god of winemaking, orchards, fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity. Didn't know that. Ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theatre. That's quite a broad range.
He had a big portfolio.
Yeah, if he was a minister, a cabinet minister, that'd be a lot, wouldn't it? We'd be moaning about him after 5 minutes, wouldn't we, for that one? Also adopted by the Romans, even recast by Christianity when it reached the Greek islands as Saint Dionysus, which I didn't know. I'll probably,
okay.
If I have another son, I'll probably name it. That'll be his middle name.
Okay,
I think so. Good. What was your first exposure to? Let's start with the work of Eddie Campbell. I know you're a fan, aren't you?
Yes. I'm not sure I'm as big a fan as you are, Tony, but yes, I am a fan. Yeah. And I think I'm more of a fan after finishing Volume 1 of Bacchus. Yeah.
Cool.
I first came across him, I think, and Bacchus, or Deadface as he was then called, in the short-lived but lovely A1 comic. And I'm holding the first issue of A1 here in my hands from Atomica Press, 1989, Dave Elliott and Gary Leach.
Nice.
And if I read off the back cover, just some of the names: Barry Windsor-Smith, Alan Moore, Eddie Campbell, obviously. Who else? John Bolton, Dave Gibbons, Brian Bolland, Dave McKean, Bill Sienkiewicz, Glenn Fabry. They're all in there.
Yeah.
So this was...
It shone brightly for a short amount of time, didn't it?
Exactly. It's 6 issues, which I've got. I don't, for some reason, have the Bikini Confidential special they did.
Yeah, nobody believes you saying that, Eamonn.
I know. Well, interestingly, I went looking for it on eBay, and all the copies I can find are in America, shipping from the United States. I can't find any secondhand copies. I mean, I probably could find it at a comic mart. But anyway, A1 was a comic that shone brightly, had wonderful creators, wonderful art. It was that period, it's the late 1980s, when we all thought, Tony, and I know you and I sort of thought this, we've talked about this, we all thought that comics were going to become the thing. You know, they'd sort of dabbled with the mainstream, and this looked like there's all these wonderful creator-owned comics starting around this time, none of which sadly lasted, of course. But yeah, that's where I first came across Deadface, as he was known then.
Yeah, and I think you're right, man. There's always excitement for comics with us, but there was a massive energy about comics at that time, wasn't there? And I think we might segue into talking a little bit about Harrier at this point, because they openly say that they came out of the black and white boom, which was we see being led by the Turtles, don't we?
Yes, of course.
Founded in 1984, and then it only ran to 1989. Martin Locke was the founder and publisher. Martin Locke, I was reading a load of fantasy advertisers and BEMS and stuff like that, and I know he was responsible for some of those as well. Short-lived, but I'm going to say influential to a certain respect. It got a lot of impressive talent early on in their careers. A lot of it is fairly basic sci-fi stuff, but there are some standouts. There's certainly some standout creators. We had Glenn Dakin. I know Colossive Press have recently put out a book of his work. He did Paris, the Man of Plaster. That gives you a stamp of it. Grant Morrison was in. He did a story called Bacchus, which was not the one we talked about with Dylan Dog, incidentally, a different one, which was in the back of Sunrise. These are things that are worth digging into long boxes if you have them, because they might be worth an eBay check. Phil Elliott was in there. He did Gag with them, I believe, but Gag has recently resurfaced. I backed the first Kickstarter. I think there's a second Kickstarter just finished or on the go at the moment for that. You also had Ryan Hughes, Paul Grist, Warren Pleece, and Dave Harwood. I know John Freeman does quite a lot of stuff with. So some of the other titles: Red Fox, Nick Hazard, Conqueror. There, I know our buddy Rob Hardingham has I think he's completed his Harrier comics collection. But this Deadface, which was the original name for Bacchus, is the series that first came from them. I can't remember how many issues it ran. Was it 9 or 10? So quite long for them. But it was in their New Wave imprint, which is a sort of cool way of having an imprint back then. Or, it was a fairly new thing, wasn't it? Epic had it, and Marvel had it with Epic and stuff. And so that was Harrier Comics. Easy to find. They're always in 50p bins and stuff like that. But worth a look to see if they're the ones that have, for example, Grant Morrison or Paul Grist or someone in who's a name. Yeah, interesting stuff.
Okay.
Did you ever... That was when you were getting back in, wasn't it, I guess?
It must have been, but I don't remember Harrier at all, I'm afraid.
Right.
That one passed me by. Yeah.
Okay, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, cool. It was just a bit of a flash in the pan. As I say, it was only 5 years at the most that it ran, but interesting. Cool. So... when was your first exposure to this book, to Bacchus? It was in A1 then, was it? Because I know that story, one of the A1 stories appears in this volume, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think it was in 5 of the 6 issues. Although actually, I say that, one of them might have been an Alex story rather than a Bacchus story. But anyway,
okay.
So he's in 5 of the 6 issues of A1. But then after that, it would have been From Hell.
Right.
obviously.
Yeah.
Because then From Hell dominated everything.
And you were reading that in the single releases from Taboo, as I understand. That's right, isn't it?
I've got
Yeah.
some of the single releases from Taboo, yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember what year they actually put it together when the graphic novel came out, because obviously everybody bought the graphic novel when it came out.
Yeah.
This volume of Bacchus, I only bought this whenever it was 2 years ago when you and I first talked about putting it on the list.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was my first encounter with the sort of like the long form story of it.
Yeah. Perhaps we should also say at this point that go back if you want to have we are gonna mention Alec, which is kind of Campbell's other long form work. I see it as he discusses this a lot about working on multiple projects at once, and Alec and Bacchus would be worked on around the same time. If you go back to episode 64, speaking of Simon again, Simon Russell and I discussed it. Simon used to write letters to each other back in the day. There's a really interesting history in that one about Alec. Alec being, and we're going to get into this, Alec being more autobiographical, or is it? I suppose is the question we're going to ask each other in a minute.
Right.
Now the thing is with this series, it's scattershot in relation to its publishing schedule, isn't it? It reached Bacchus and the Eyeball Kid reached across a number of companies that it was almost hard to keep track of. That's certainly how I felt about it. I would buy it whenever I saw something with Campbell, or if I saw Bacchus, but there were so many companies where he would just sort of go and publish something with and then move on to someone else for a long time. It's difficult to keep track of. And even in this volume, if you try and look at the front page of this volume and find out where these stories originally came from, there's no real list either, is there?
No, I was looking at that. I mean, it is fascinating when a creator actually wants to carry on their story, even though it's jumping from publisher to comic to their own independently published comic, whatever, rather than each time, as you can understand, they would do, just say, all right, this is a new gig, I'll come up with something new for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, he obviously, this was something that burned inside him, that he wanted to carry on doing Bacchus, despite all the hurdles and all of these sort of brief comics that came and went. Yeah,
it's strange like that, isn't it? It's well, let's get into it now, because I think when you talk about the urge to continue with it, I mean, I almost feel like if he'd have started his own company, kept at his own company, published however many hundreds of issues of Bacchus, we would perhaps more easily describe this as the UK Cerebus. But because of the sort of scattershot nature and the in and out nature of the publishing model, I can see it, but it doesn't immediately jump to my mind, if that makes sense.
So that's very interesting, because I know from images you've sent me that Dave Sim and Eddie Campbell are sort of like fans of each other.
Yeah.
And Dave Sim has drawn Bacchus.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of names that jumped at me, or a couple of other titles that jumped at me when I was reading this. One of them was Cerebus, particularly as there's a sort of one of the villain characters looked to me like he was a Cerebus character.
Okay.
And the other one that jumped to my mind was, and you know, I'll say that I did think of this honestly, Simon, before Simon mentioned it on episode 64. But right. When you and I talked about Mort Cinder,
very much so,
the Alberto Breccia book. But yeah, I mean, it's a big, huge phone book, so it does feel a bit like a Cerebus volume, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's the phone book nature of the publishing.
Black and white comics.
Yeah,
it's got a very indie vibe to it. Yeah.
To be fair, I love the comparison to Breccia, and I was talking to Johnny Cannon about it on the phone on Friday. It's so distinct, especially for me in the faces, the close up of Bacchus, aka Deadface. It really does remind me of that, beautifully so. I could do with a comic of him just talking close up faces.
Yeah, we both agree that when Eddie Campbell does Bacchus's face in a close up, it's just wonderful. They are some of the highlights of the whole book. Is just having his face sort of brought in close to the camera, and it's wonderful. But yeah. I mean, it's the UK's indie black and white huge phone books.
Yeah, gorgeous stuff. That and the Alex stuff, I'd recommend anyone have on the shelf. There's there's a personality to them that is just extraordinary, which leads me on to talking about Bacchus as an autobiographical, or certainly pseudo-autobiographical venture. Now, I texted you, one of my many late night texts to you was, whenever he says a little riddle or a rhyme about being in the drink, or, there's always little poems and offshoots. Bacchus drowns it with the bowl, troubles that corrode the soul, and which is, I think, from Cato, not the one we normally like. But I hear Campbell saying it somehow. I mean, this may be because you and I have watched a lot of interviews with him recently and listened to a lot of interviews. But is Bacchus Campbell to a certain extent, do you think?
It's a good question. I think the moments when he's just chatting with Simpson, who he just uses as a sort of sounding board, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It feels more like Campbell's voice at those moments. Bacchus sitting at the bar, or Bacchus walking through a Greek island or a Greek village, chatting with Simpson, feels like Campbell. And it feels like, because we know from our, reading around the subject, Eddie Campbell mentions Robert Graves's versions of the Greek myths a lot. Yeah. He was a huge fan, and it feels like Bacchus doing that. I think Robert Graves even gets name checked by Bacchus at one point.
Oh, okay.
It feels like that. But yeah. And also, Tony, you have in your time walked into a bar and met some people with some fantastical stories to tell you.
Yeah.
You've met blokes who lean against the bar who will tell you that they are...
well, that's why I wonder if I'm imprinting
right.
something on Campbell's personality, who I've barely spent any time at all with, apart from across a convention table, and then observed him sitting next to me whilst I had a blazing drunken row with a friend in a restaurant.
Right.
I wonder whether I'm imprinting that this is this storytelling in drink, great company, kind of bloke you want to sit next to in a bar and hear stories. It's the equivalent to that bloke in Jaws who tells the story about the sharks in the sea, and the Robert Shaw character to me.
Yeah.
There's always someone who you can sit and they go, hang on a minute, let me tell you this story. And a lot of people, when they say that these days, you go, oh, here we go. Most people, when I say that to them, their eyes roll, But there are those people out there who tell us a story and we listen and we're enraptured. And, there is, isn't there? Who's that? Is it Dickie Quinn or Tim Howlett? I always forget his name now. One of those two. He did the rounds of comic conventions for a while. And he would do that. And he said, I'll tell you about the time I used to work in a circus. And you're like, right, I'm having this. Right, okay. Let's have this. And I kind of sense that a bit about... Is bon vivant? Is that the right term? Do you know that sort of term for Campbell? Yeah. And it's massively me imprinting a certain opinion on him, which I have no certainty at all is him at all. But having watched him interviews, he's so non sequitur and he's so loose and avoiding and storytelling, but then at moments just so interesting about his craft. I kind of feel the bits when he comes out with these little poems. He says, let me tell you about the time that, Zeus did this, or, Zeus couldn't get a hard on, or, these sort of really outrageous stories that are very interesting.
And I've now cast Robert Shaw as Quint from Jaws as Bacchus.
Well, that would be perfect, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Wandering around the Greek islands, telling tales. Yeah.
The other thing about this is it's we go back to this. It's something Dan and I and Vince have discussed before. I'm not sure if we have, but I'm certainly drawn to the twilight of people's lives, the hinterlands. The wilderness years, as it were. Everything from Wolverine through to King of Spies by Miller. Through to this, there's something. Are you drawn to that story, Eamonn?
Well, it's why Old Man Logan worked so well. It's why The Dark Knight Returns worked so well. It's why that story of Robin Hood firing his final arrow into the air sort of works, doesn't it? It's. I'd rather watch the film where Sean Connery plays the ancient Robin Hood than Kevin Costner plays the mulleted version. And Sean Connery turns up at the end as King. Anyway,
I've forgotten he turned up at the end there. Yeah, that was something of a highlight. Yeah.
Those stories are wonderful, aren't they? The old bruiser who's in the twilight of their career. There's some great books about. Books without pictures about.
I've heard of them.
older men who've been through some stuff. But even, I suppose, Marv in Sin City, isn't he? He's
Yeah.
sort of, yeah.
It's not because we are older men who've been through some stuff, Eamon, is it? Do you think? I don't know whether that's true or not.
I haven't been through the stuff that Bacchus has been through. No,
No, me
no,
neither.
nor
Yeah.
Quint from Jaws. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that lovely head of hair you got may be hiding the odd horn. I'm still
I
suspicious.
think it could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is it's multidiscipline. This book, isn't it? It's in storytelling. I kind of there's part of me that sometimes thinks Campbell's getting bored. He wants to just try something different. And then there's part of me that thinks that this is the richness of the narrative, is that we get these outrageous stories that Bacchus will tell. We get for example, you say it starts in a prison cell, which is a lovely little opener. And then we get comedy bits. We almost get a soap opera in a way with his little group of friends and the villain and his girlfriend and stuff like that, and the eyeball kid. But it's so disorganised, but I suspect an organisation is the way I look at it. Do you see it as that cohesive or not?
I think appropriate enough for a story about telling stories and tales.
Yeah.
It does jump about a bit. And having it collected, because there's 5 separate story arcs in this one volume.
Yeah, which are the separate original trades, aren't they, as well, if you buy them that way. Yeah.
And so it does jump about a bit. And we do, Eddie Campbell's obviously fascinated with the adventures of Joe Theseus, who is Theseus from Greek myth.
Who's kind of a gangster villain character in this, isn't he?
Yes. And he's got his sort of, I don't know what you'd call him, his sidekick, the eyeball kid, who is the grandson of a Greek demigod, the giant Argos, the multi-eyed, 100-eyed giant, which has always proved difficult to depict in artwork. He's like the opposite of the Cyclops. You can do the Cyclops with one eye, but the 100-eyed giant proved difficult to depict in sculpture and art, it seems.
He doesn't he? You don't really say. He was given the job of standing atop a mountain and keeping looking out for someone, but of course fell asleep, as the people doing those kind of classic stories. But yeah.
So his grandson is the eyeball kid, and him and Joe Theseus have these sorts of gangster-like adventures where they're going up against rival gangs and criminals, and there's the mafia get involved, and it's a whole big thing, and that's fun. But I was actually in those volumes, I was sort of thinking, no, I want to get back to Bacchus telling stories that are
massively. That's how I felt about it. There's tranches of this where I do feel like a number of things. One, I want to get back to Bacchus. I just love that sort of laconic storytelling thing he does, and there's something just about Bacchus sitting around a pub table, which is I think issue 2, isn't it? And there's also stuff where we get a fill-in artist as well, which we'll talk a little bit in the art about the art as well. But yeah, I kind of feel, because it's funny as well, this book, isn't it? There's a comedy element to it. It's winkingly funny.
Yes.
Whole bits of it. Tonally, I think that may have been the problem for it, is people didn't know what to expect. But I think that would maybe me sort of interpreting a problem that would exist today, not one that would have existed back in the 80s when this was originally coming out. I think we were used to that, especially stuff like A1 and Deadline and even 2000 AD. Tonally stuff shifted all over the place, didn't it? It was just we were so excited by those 5 pages that we got at the time. Interesting. Okay. Right, good. Let's talk a little bit about the fill-in artist, because the main character we had was Ilya, Ed Hillier, as he's the stand-in, but he's a stand-in for a big chunk of this, isn't he? Almost half the book he's involved in. He works,
and he does. I was going to say he does. Does he do pretty much all the art on the 4th one, the Eyeball Kid story?
Yes, he does, and I think the mini-series that was, he's credited, isn't he? Campbell's extremely nice, and rightly he should be about him for his art style, and he said he did a lot of the heavy lifting, and they worked in a number of different ways according to Campbell. I've seen in interviews, he'd work from thumbnails, and some Campbell would just say, crack on, here's a script. Ed Hill is probably better known to me before this book for doing his stuff End of the Century Club and skid marks at Tundra. He's still active now, still a cartoonist now, and he has a really great Substack. if you want to read it. There's it's a real crafty, comic-y Substack, which is worth looking at. He's also can be seen in volume 2 of this as well, if you look for that. Did you find his style gelled well with Campbell's?
So I think he's done a very good job on recreating the sort of character look of Campbell's characters.
Yeah.
He is, I don't know if I would say he's slightly more cartoony than Campbell's black and white inky style.
Yeah.
What I particularly liked, particularly in the Eyeball Kid adventure, is there's a battle going on, and this time the Greek god Hermes is involved, and Hermes has equipped himself with a giant metal hand, which I guess Hephaestus, the
very shaky cane I saw. I think Jim Rugg referred to it as very shaky cane. I can see that page. You know, the big page with it up towards your face, the single splash page.
Right, because I was thinking also very Jack Kirby.
Yes, well, yeah, you're right, man.
You know, I mean, if you've got a giant hand in the the sort of the forepart of the panel, you've got to think Kirby.
Yeah, you're right. You're much. I mean, and Shaky Kane is very Kirby, isn't he? So you're completely right there. Yeah.
So he does some Kirby there. So I liked all that, seeing all that. But it does stand out a bit, and you think, actually, no, I do want to get back to Campbell's scratchy style, or at least back to, this will be slightly tricky, but back to Campbell's scratchy style when he seems to be putting his all into a panel.
Yeah.
Because some of the panels, dare I suggest, he
what's the page that is just, there's a page that's just like random pictures of things you'd see in your kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah, which works because he uses each image to describe something underneath. But you do think, like, come on, what are you doing there? You know. Yeah, I agree, man. I think Ilya there's a certain Ditko-esque quality, a slightly sort of more rounded quality to it, which I love. I like that. I think Ilya's good, but because I'd started with that Campbell stuff, I would rather especially Campbell's use of blacks. For those that haven't seen Bacchus, go look him up. He's got that black cap on. He's got that very lined face, and then he's got a black coat, like a long black trench coat kind of thing going on, which seemed to be. I bet you wore those as a student. I'm willing to bet good money. Those and DMs. We all seemed to have one, didn't we?
We all had one of those. Yeah.
But it's interesting because it makes your vision of movement intuitive, because there's no lines amongst it a lot of the time. It's just this mass of black. And it goes back to something I talked about on the Vigilante episode. This is completely unassociated, but from a sort of point of view of blacks, is you've got a Vigilante who's a character whose costume is almost completely black, and your eye is interpreting where the musculature is and where the movement is, where essentially if you just took that off a page and put it on a white page, it would just be a blob. And the denseness of those blacks is beautiful to me. And then you say, like, you've got these scratches and these splatters as well that he does. Yeah.
The more ink he has on a page or a panel, the more I like it.
Yeah, me too.
The images you and I have been sharing on WhatsApp, where he uses lots of black on the page, is great.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we always talk about recognizable silhouettes for characters.
Yeah.
And Bacchus with the cap and the long black coat, it's just that just works. Even though, as you say, it's just a wodge of black, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, back to a sort of DIY punk version of Sin City. I'll mention it again. But it's almost like a UK, sarcastic version of Sin City in a way. It's just there's such charm to it. Just love it. But it's rough around the edges. There's a roughness to the storytelling here. It's an instinctual stuff, and he talks a lot about that, where Campbell talks about using photocopies and collage and just various techniques when it comes to a page. Did you notice that sort of thing?
There's a couple of pages that stood out to me where he's clearly using, as you say, either photo collage or very heavy photo reference to do bits of Greek pottery or sculpture or something like that.
Almost like a town on a hill I occasionally saw, in a valley behind where they're walking.
There's a wonderful, when Bacchus, I think it's the third volume, Bacchus does the islands, or doing the Greek islands with
one of
Bacchus.
my faves. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's my favourite as well. Where they get like an overhead, almost now we'd call it the drone shot that you see in every crime drama.
Yeah, because it's
And
cheap now, isn't it? Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
so cheap, and they have it in every true crime documentary and every crime drama. The overhead drone shot. But Campbell does that of them walking up these vertiginous steps up the mountainside while he's telling a story to Simpson, and it's just wonderful.
yeah.
Again, and you've got it's the Aegean Sea, I guess, which is just black with some flecks of white on it.
So good. Yeah,
I think Homer. It was there's a phrase from Homer, the wine dark sea, which seems appropriate
yeah,
for Bacchus, obviously.
yeah. We'll get onto that. I do love the quotes in this. The way it is, but yeah, interesting. We're talking about the art there. I know when he did his comic book resources interview, he says he makes it up as he goes along. I kind of admire that, and I think he means that in relation to the art and the story. Alan Moore speaks a lot. I mean, they're obviously close collaborators and friends, and he speaks a lot about him. And there's a few things that I noted down that Alan Moore has said about him. He says his artistic style is loose and impressionistic, fresh and exciting. Yeah, that's
Right.
a good summation of it to me. He also, at one point, Alan Moore said that he thought Campbell was a better writer than an artist. And I don't know if I agree.
Right.
I'm not sure. I think with Campbell, more so than many other artists and writers, it's one and the same. The personality is the writing and the art combined. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think this works best when you've got Campbell writing and drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Bacchus, absolutely. Interestingly, because you mentioned Alan Moore, because we were trying to work out the chronology, because somewhere around about the middle of this omnibus, From Hell starts to take off, doesn't it?
Yeah, he works. He claims he was working on that, Alec and Bacchus all at the same time.
Yeah, and so he's clearly getting very busy, and that's partly why I think the fourth volume gets Ilya artwork on it, and Wes Kubelik does some of the sort of.
And later we get Steve Bissett on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the Bissett stuff, because the Bissett stuff seems to me the perfect complement to Eddie Campbell's artwork. That he seems to get closest collaboration that works perfectly. And of course, the Taboo comic, that was where From Hell first appeared. That's Steve Bissett's project.
Of course. Yeah.
So they're all doing their own thing at this time. None of these titles particularly have carried on, as it were, but at least the graphic novels that came from them have survived.
Very few companies have carried on, haven't they? Let's face it, over the years, over the course of our reading. Yeah, the company, the ones that we'd like to have stayed never did they? I still mourn the death of Kamiko, but there you go.
You were talking about great publishers on the Awesome Comic podcast last week. Yeah.
The thing is, as well, is Campbell talks about making a picture rather than drawing a comic panel, which I found very interesting. And he talks about everything that goes into that, building that picture up. And he says it's not past him to use a photocopied about 14 times and inked over in order to show a mountain with a town and a valley with a lane running through it and stuff. My eye allows it more with these indie books than I would if, for example, if I saw it in a Greg Land comic, an Avengers Greg Land comic or something like that. But there's a beauty to it, and I thought this might be a good segue for us to talk about we each picked a page out or a short sequence that we wanted to talk about from an art point of view before we just get on with some other questions I had for you. What did you pick out, mate?
Well, I've already mentioned the overhead shot from page 275.
Yeah.
This is from my favourite middle section of the book, where Bacchus is just sort of jaunting around the Greek islands with his lawyer or his dead companion or his former Oxford Don Simpson, whoever he is.
I do love the way he's referred to as the twittering dead.
The twittering
long before we had the twittering idiots that we have now. But I do like that. Sorry, mate.
So the overhead shot there, as they walk up the side of this hillside, this mountainside.
Yeah.
I do like the Bissett stuff.
Good. Yeah.
So that's page. Let's have a look. 325 was the one I picked out, because that's got a close-up of Bacchus's face on it, but you can clearly see the set on that page and some of the sort of creatures that we'd seen in Swamp Thing.
Yeah, there's massive shades of Swamp Thing there, isn't there? Definitely. Yeah. That rain and the water and the wetness and the feel of it. Definitely. Yeah, the vines. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, almost. Yeah, there is almost Swamp Thing in it, in a way, isn't there? With that eyeball. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, that's gorgeous, man. How much are these pages going for? I was going to pick page 291, A God and His Dog.
Oh yes, we talked about this. Yes, that's right. Carry on.
So Bacchus lands. This is part. I believe this is part of the sequence where they. Is this where they went to an island?
Yes.
Yeah, and there's a. It's almost like Campbell. In my head, this is me imprinting again. My opinion of meeting in like, oh, Campbell wants to just tell the story of humankind now. You know, basically from the point they all are sort of naked and starving on a blank piece of land, and the way that the world grows up around them, and they grow up, you know, in good and bad ways. But there's this moment where he's lying on the ground, Bacchus, and vines begin to grow round him. Now there's an interview I heard. I'll have to get the name. I'll put it in the notes. But there's an interview he did with a podcast, which was really interesting from a craft point of view, where he talks about the joy of making a picture, and he says, I'd mix anything onto a page. And with that, if you look at the white and the black vines that are growing around him, that is from that's house paint. So he drew it.
Oh right, okay.
And then he dribbled a load of house paint onto the page, because he says, I'll use anything if it works. And he dribbled it, and the interview. The interview didn't really know what to say, and he said, well, at least the cat didn't sit in it. And I just think that's great, and it's just,
if the cat had sat in it, he probably would have still used the pen.
Yeah, would use the cat's anus as part of the image. But the Bacchus doesn't move much in this book. It's rare that he does anything of any sort of cliched comic dynamism at any point in this.
He gets off a boat. That's about the most movement he does.
Yeah, he lifts a glass to his lips and in a bar. But in this one, he's asleep. But to say this is one of my favourite drawings, I like it because you've got a God and his dog, and then Campbell has sort of scrawled a silly dog in the top right-hand corner, when the dog doesn't even really play into the picture. It's about these vines that grow up about it. And it's just about how he can make wine out of his own body, and then the people on the island all fall out with each other. They're all wearing vine leaves, and he says, well, actually they're not vine leaves originally, were they? They were wine leaves, and it all goes off from there. But just that sort of, like you say, that solid use of blacks there. We can see in panel 2 that just the two triangles just indicate that is the lapels of his coat, but
his coat, yeah,
you know, take that out of it, no one would have a clue. I'm sure there's more going on in that fact there. And he draws boots so well. Yeah. They're the DMs you used to have as a student, Eamonn, just to let you know.
Yes.
And your black coat, and that's what I think they indicate.
That's students used to wear that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's lovely. It is a lovely page, and it takes place in that island hopping section of the book, where him and Simpson have turned up at this bare rock of a Greek island at the same time as a boatload of young, rich, beautiful people are being dropped off for 5 days. I'm not sure that's what the rich and beautiful do, but anyway.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And then they become sort of parts of this massive story that Bacchus tells about the history of humanity and the history.
Yeah, proto-society almost, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. It's a very weird but very wonderful interlude in the middle of this book.
Yeah. In the intro to that section, he says he felt like he was doing a horror book at that point, which again switches the frame of reference I had for it,
right?
And allows me to think of it in a different way somehow. I don't know. Yeah, he also uses the phrase, "I always avoid superhero posturing," which I found to be an interesting phrase.
And it's delightful, and I see that episode ends with him just lying, just Bacchus lying there with all these vines growing around him, and you can see. I mean, I'm always referencing previous episodes we've done, Tony, but you can see on that one that Campbell's just let his pen go for a walk on that page, isn't he?
Really has, hasn't he?
Just like our friend Ronald Searle. Yeah.
Yeah, very. Do you know what? It never occurred to me, but there is definitely a quality of that in there, isn't there?
Well, we always link all of our episodes. Don't we?
That's true. Yeah.
Mort's in there. Episode 64, doing Alec with Simon Russell.
This is very like the Valiant by Valiant comics. Good stuff. Right, let's get on to some of the slightly more critical subjects, the questions I had for you. Let's quickly deal with one thing, which is I'll posit that Campbell is a massive contrarian, especially in his interviews. He is a man like myself, and I guess you, because I've seen it in your face when I talk to you, easily bored. And he was asked about comics in an interview in the Comics Journal issue 145. You can go and look it up, which I've titled my page in the notes, King of the Contrarians. And he says to him, I wouldn't be seen, he's asked about comic books, and he said, I wouldn't be seen reading a comic book, dead reading a comic book in the street. I've written brackets, is he in a playful mood? I wouldn't hesitate to betray comics as a medium. It's worthless, it's scabby, it's horrible.
Oh, St. Peter.
Yeah, it's that, isn't it?
Betrayal.
Yeah, say it 3 times, Eddie. Yeah.
Well, it's perhaps not too surprising that he's great friends and great collaborators with comics' greatest contrarian, Alan Moore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he is so fascinating, Eddie Campbell, because, as you say, he has, at various points in his career, he's issued various statements and interviews. And, of course, I'm sure you're going to ask me about, or you're going to mention the manifesto.
Yes, I was going to get onto that next day. So yeah,
that absolutely. You know, he's not in this, I think, to make friends and influence people. He's doing this because, to quote Rorschach, he's doing it because he's compelled in a way.
Yeah,
he just has to make this art. And yeah, he comes across in some of his interviews as being very sort of, at times, slightly grumpy and contrarian. Although I did notice, I talked to you about this before, that he does seem to be becoming Billy Connolly as he ages.
Visually, definitely, isn't he? Yeah, yes. Yeah. Should we go that way? Let's go that way. I know we're men with lovely heads of hair and still full of auburn gorgeousness like chocolate waterfalls, but maybe we should go that way one day, Eamonn.
Start going the silver D'Artagnan and the softly spoken Billy Connolly way.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. I think there is that. I mean, and who amongst us of a certain age haven't at some point? I texted to this day, and he won't mind me saying that just 12 hours ago, I texted Christian Wildgoose saying, comics have broke me today, my friend. And who hasn't amongst us at some point thought, oh, come on, for fuck's sake.
Yes.
What is this nonsense?
Yeah. I think that about a lot of the big two's current superhero comics.
Most certainly, yeah. We've discussed it, I know. I think that is. Now, you hinted there at his graphic novel manifesto, which is a 10-point list that he published. I think you said it was in the Comics Journal, was it? I'm not. Is that right?
I tried to find it where it was originally published, and it takes you to a strange website that my machine keeps saying, "Oh, you shouldn't visit this."
Your machine never says that. Come on.
Yeah. I don't know. Was it on the Comics Journal website or something like that?
Okay. Yeah, I found it on a weird sort of blue background, circa 1997 blog type thing. I wasn't sure. I'd only heard about it through interviews. So he wrote this manifesto. He got a bit bored of it. He had I'm guessing a grumpy moment, and he wrote this manifesto about graphic novels, more about the term than anything else, I think. And the story goes, he wrote it. It stayed up for a while. He kept deleting it from his Wikipedia page, and it kept getting added back in there. And then he went to I think that was after he'd been to a European convention where they'd almost treated it like the Stations of the Cross in a convention hall. So it's the amount of nonsense I've written. I hate to think it'll be like etched into a wall somehow, with a man with a cross and a thurible. But the point one in it reads, and I'm not going to read it all, but it reads: graphic novels is a disagreeable term, but we will use it anyway on the understanding that graphic has nothing to do with graphics, and that novel does not mean anything to do with novel. In the same way that impressionism is not really an applicable term. In fact, it was the first used as an insult and then adopted in the spirit of defiance. I guess, I don't know what you're like, but I've certainly had a discussion with people where they've asked, oh, you read comics, do you? And I said, yeah, I read comics. Yeah, do you read comics? And they go, no, I read graphic novels. And I thought, I really want to stab a fork into you now.
We've all done that, haven't we? We've all had that experience, where you say to somebody, it's a bit like that joke about the band Wings, when young people say to you, was Paul McCartney in a band before Wings then?
Yes, yeah, slightly,
and when people say about, I like the graphic novel Watchmen, and I go, comic book.
Comics, yeah, it was a comic, yeah.
And they say, was it a comic before it was a graphic novel? As I'm getting older, and now that we're trying to be, what are we, proselytizers, gate openers, I think I now sort of like say, yeah, it's fine, it's a graphic novel, call it what you like, just read it.
Yeah. And I occasionally do hate myself for saying the term, but it's an explainer now, isn't it? It's entered the vernacular. It's like saying, I'm going to chillax. It's not a word I would use, and I'd hate myself for using it, but unfortunately it's entered the common vernacular.
And people know what they mean. Yes, people know what they're referring to, even though we might say, actually, the comic.
Point 3. Graphic novel signifies a movement rather than a form. Thus, we may refer to antecedents of the graphic novel, such as Lord Ward's woodcut novels, but we're not interested in applying the name retroactively. Okay, you know what? Right, whatever. I agree. Yeah. It is something of a movement. The same as zines has become the new graphic novel phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yes, that's very much a thing.
I don't make comics, I make zines. But they've got comics in them. They're just sort of photocopied comics, aren't they? It's just sort of... Yeah, anyway. And then number 6 is the final one I was going to read. The goal of the graphic novelist is to take the form of the comic book, and then I've underlined the phrase he uses, which has become an embarrassment, and raise it to a more ambitious and meaningful level. I don't know, man. I don't know. I kind of think that half the people who do graphic novels couldn't draw a comic if it killed them. We've all encountered that Emperor's New Clothes moment, haven't we? Something gets hyped beyond words, and the level of expectation is raised so high that you look at it. Quid pro quo, the Eisners that we've just had, and the list of comics that I could have included in that, and thinking, why not? Why isn't this there? Why did this win?
Funnily enough, Eddie Campbell does in fact mention Eisner by name in point 6, doesn't he? Because he mentions Contract with God.
And I have been referring to the Eisners as the so-called Eisners recently, because I kind of think they don't really have anything to do with him anymore, which is a shame. It's just the Grumpy Manifesto. I love the is it Bukowski who said "right angry"? I kind of like that people do it. Sometimes we get the truth. People sometimes.
Shall I do point 10 on the manifesto?
Please do. Yeah.
The graphic novelist reserves the right to deny any or all of the above if it means a quick sale.
Which is just massively Campbell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, king of the contrarians. And that's how I see his interviews, and that's how I see him talk in these interviews, where it's almost like he's got other things on his mind half the time, and then for a few minutes you get that like deep concentration on the craft of making a page, and then he's back to, of course, I don't really do this, and someone says, you don't, and you go, well, I do it sometimes. It's all these sort of double-sided. I love it. I love people who say things they don't mean, and just have that twinkle in their eye. Okay, a couple more critical questions for you. The Comics Journal interview that I read, I think it's with a buddy of his. He asked the question, which I'm going to ask you: is Bacchus too cerebral for mainstream audiences?
No.
No.
Short answer. Well, it's complicated because it deals with Greek myths, and it also deals with the history of everything.
Yeah.
But is it too cerebral? Should we disqualify certain books or properties because they're too cerebral? I don't know. It's
Shakespeare's pretty cerebral, isn't it? But it was written for the common man, and it's still consumed by the common man at bloody O levels or whatever they call them now. But I think the idiocracy that we see quoted at us all the time these days, I think the way that you lift us out of idiocracy is by people reading stuff like this. And
we want people to be reading smart books. This is a smart book. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
give it a go.
Yeah, I've been doing some research into American politics, and I've got to tell you, if we could airdrop these to some states in America, we will be a better world. I'll be honest with you.
That could be a whole long conversation for another podcast.
Exactly.
About let's just say that if we're talking about myths and legends, the myths of America that we grew up with as kids turned out to be
They did, didn't they?
woefully exaggerated. Yes.
Remind me to tell you a funny anecdote after we finish. But yeah,
Okay,
you're
right.
absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Captain America's almost a villain now, isn't he? The world's upside down somehow.
Not the greatest country in the world.
No, God, I love it. I almost moved there, but same as us, folks. You've got your issues. Yeah. What was the next one I was going to say? Do you think you can see where it's written in clumps almost, where his attention is drawn elsewhere and then suddenly he's back laser focused onto Bacchus again?
Well, I sort of saw it as I was reading this was the story he wanted to do.
Yeah.
But his attention was taken away by other projects that would probably pay him at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And I think that's what I saw. I thought that there was some, as I've already said, there were some pages, particularly earlier on in the book, where it didn't seem like it had his full attention. I think his artwork, clearly his artwork improves while he's doing Bacchus because he's doing so much else at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of, I suppose what you've got 5 trades worth in here, haven't we?
Yeah,
We've read
that's right.
5 trades.
Yeah.
So I suppose there is that sort of clumping to it. And they are all fairly distinct stories. They're different stories.
Yeah.
I just think he was, probably, as I say, From Hell was taking off, so he was busy on that, and he was also doing the Alex stories. So yeah.
And that approach has a charm to it as well.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been 2 years since I wrote Atomic Hercules story, but it's always the second or third album. People go, "Oh, it's a difficult second album." No, it's not. You've got ideas, for a first album. You can do a second album, but sometimes you do need a refresh. You do need to sort of,
go away and do something else for a while.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm going to get onto the some mentions in the review section that I've looked up around this to see whether we agree or not. But before we do that, and before we then get on after that to talk about your projects, okay, I'm going to ask you to rank these. It's difficult, and it's changed for me about 4 times this week. You have to rank Alec, the collected Bacchus, and the collected From Hell. Which is your first and which is your last? Favourite?
Okay, so I think it's difficult to see past the iceberg monolith that is From Hell.
Yeah.
And to put that as number 1.
Okay.
Even though that is another difficult, big book to read.
Yeah.
But it is, I mean, it's such an important graphic novel. It is, because I've done it on the book club with Pete Wells.
Yeah, great episode that, man. I love Pete, listening to Pete. He's really good.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll tell him. He'll be very pleased. It is, it's a weird book to talk about Eddie Campbell's artwork on it, because, and also, this is another controversial subject, the fact that Campbell has recently coloured it himself.
Yes.
But yeah, his black and white artwork for Victorian England, Victorian London it's so oppressive. It's so moody and atmospheric. That book makes you feel.
There's very little out there that really brings home the squalor of the East End, isn't there?
Exactly. Yeah. And it makes you feel uncomfortable when you read it. It's an uncomfortable read. You feel nauseous reading it.
If I can interject, I'm going to say I think that's maybe my first as well. And I think artistically it's a different approach. You've got that. He talks a lot about the cross-hatching. I wish I'd never started that cross-hatching, doesn't he? So you hear him say
yes, he does. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and I think
from my own back.
I've read it twice. The first time I read it, I think I told you I was stuck in an office for a couple of days, and I read it, and it had a massive impact on me in relation to the strength of storytelling in that. I often would say I consider it to be probably Moore's best written book.
Right.
Your mileage varies on that, but okay. Were you going to go on to your second, or did you have something else to say?
Well, second would be Bacchus, I think.
Okay,
and
right.
Third, just because I haven't read it for a long while, Alec. Although I might throw in 2 other books of Eddie Campbell's that I've read recently. One is there's a 2-volume that's been squished together into 1 volume, The Fate of the Artist.
Yes,
and
came out a couple of years ago, didn't it? Or last year, yeah.
and the second fake death, and that is more sort of autobiographical, but also changing format, changing media, changing his artistic styles, telling a sort of elliptical, sort of almost like a murder story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, as you know, I picked up very cheaply at Gosh Comics A Disease of Language by Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell.
Yeah.
And this is two of Alan Moore's sort of, what would you call them? Dramatic readings that he's done.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Long form poems,
Yeah.
The Birth Call and Snakes and Ladders, that Eddie Campbell has now illustrated in black and white, although it's more sort of watercolory, washy sort of.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Stuff.
Yeah.
And then at the back of the book, there's a very long interview between Eddie Campbell and Alan Moore, which is fascinating as well. So I'd recommend those as well. But I'd certainly put, I think From Hell I'm going to put first, and then I'm going to put Bacchus in second place. What about you, Tony?
Yeah, like you, man, it's difficult, isn't it? And it's very much influenced by what I've read recently, I think. I have a huge a huge love for his pseudo-autobiographical stuff, the Alex stuff, because I read it in such little snatches. I read it in some of the little trades that came out, some of the single issue stuff that came out. And it's so evocative of me to the life that we lived in the 80s and 90s with our friends and the pubs and the clubs and the relationships and the ups and downs that I just, I just adore that stuff.
There's an awful lot of people sort of walking into cafes, meeting their mates, going back and dumping their clothes on the floor or whatever, I'm sort of all that.
Yeah.
Getting into their mates' crappy cars and things,
Exactly, there is, isn't there? And it reminds me a lot of the early literary people who were writing that stuff, the likes of Amos and who's the dude who wrote My Beautiful Laundrette? I love his short stories, but those people were writing these sort of Hanif Qureshi, pardon me. Yeah, thank you, man. These people were writing these gritty but realistic, ashtrays full of cigarette butts and drunken people and just reality that we don't really see. I talked a bit about it this week on the ACP around Adam Phelps' new book, and I just think we don't see that reality of the missed in fiction now common man. And I think his Alec books really bring that up. But then again, having just read Bacchus, I'm massively fascinated, especially like you, with the Bacchus sequences in this book. The ones where Bacchus, if they could take everything out and just do me 100 pages just to the bits with Bacchus wandering around talking to Simpson, I would love that book. Absolutely adore it. It'd be in my back pocket all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, today I read some of his I know we talked about his Hellblazer. We had a discussion about him doing Hellblazer, and we both said, well, I'm sure I read it. I can't remember anything about it. So he did it with Sean Phillips, and I reread a couple of issues of that this morning over breakfast, and pretty lively.
Issues 85 to 88 of the original Hellblazer run.
Thank you, mate.
It's the sort of Hellfire Club story.
Yeah.
Where a sort of version of the Hellfire Club has come back to haunt Constantine, and he's got a job to do for them or something.
Yeah.
And Sean Phillips artwork, but written by Eddie Campbell. And I went back. I haven't read the fourth one yet. I read the first three.
Okay.
And that's great.
Yeah, the bit about some bits like the bit about where the woman gets caught smuggling drugs through customs in a dead baby she was coddling.
Yeah.
Man, this is like lively. Yeah. Although the villain at one point does look a bit like Patrick McNee, and then in another panel he looked a bit like Tom Baker, and I thought, there's a couple of old UK faces that really are evocative to me. But there's that. And then the thing that I read this morning, talk about random reads, is issue 400 of Uncanny X-Men, which I remember him talking about. He just got the phone call when he was talking at Bristol at a convention about doing that comic. I think it's Joe Casey writing it, I think. And it's like, I've never seen it's one of my favourite ever renditions of Wolverine. It's just sort of Wolverine with this person tied to a chair and he's sort of torturing him. And I'm like, this is great. It's like this I'll send you a picture of it. I took a screenshot of it. Just this close up of Wolverine's face. I thought, that's just brilliant. Yeah.
I always forget or hadn't really known that he's done things like Wolverine and Captain America.
And Batman as well.
Yeah. Batman. Because one of the interviews I watched, he's talking about that. Now, was it with, am I allowed to say Noah Van Sciver? Totally.
Yes, yeah, that's the YouTube, yeah, not the other one that we shan't not say, yeah.
No,
yeah.
we can talk about Noah Van Sciver's interview with Eddie Campbell.
Yeah.
That's good, right? Yeah, okay.
That's another one where he's just away thinking about other things half the time, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm astonishing that he's done these sort of mainstream big two comics at various points.
Yeah, it really is. I've just sent you that picture of Wolverine's close up of Wolverine's face.
Okay, cool.
I think it's one of the favourite things I've ever seen. Cool. Right. Okay. So let's quickly run through before we get on to, because we've massively overrun as always. A couple of the comments that I looked up. So after all the research, you and I do pages of research. I'd looked up to see what the reviewers had said about this, and a moment of Cerebus, which is one of my favourite things. The Sims says he liked to imagine Bacchus sitting in the corner of a convention bar, listening to fellas talking about comic book gods. And that was the best thing. And that's the piece that I sent you the Dave Sim artwork of Bacchus from.
Right, okay, very nice.
Probably one of my favourite renditions of Bacchus outside of some of the stuff in this book. Slings and Arrows website describes it as a strange change in direction. Boring.
Okay.
The comic book resources said they liked the irony of it. Well, there you go. Americans getting irony. You can't hope for better than that, can you? The Ninth Art website describes it as bittersweet, comical, and regrets of things past, which is, there is that angle to it, which I haven't really considered. We haven't considered so far in this chat, but it's very bittersweet, isn't it? I suppose that comes along with the hinterlands of someone's life.
Yes. Yeah, because we see him as a young god early on, but he's an old guy now, isn't he? He's aging.
Yeah.
Unlike Joe Theseus, who has got the secret to immortality. But
yeah. The Comic Book Bastards said would love to have seen a cover gallery in this volume. I agree with that, probably.
Okay.
There's the Harrier stuff isn't perhaps brilliant, but it's part of it for me. It's part of the history of it for me. Maybe a back section. I mean, this is very much just meat and potatoes, this book, isn't it? You don't get any extra material, really.
Oh, you just get the sort of introductions from Eddie Campbell himself, don't you?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
The only extra bit you get is each chapter is given a wine to drink to accompany it whilst reading it. Now, but in an interview I read with Campbell, he said that he didn't do that. That was Drawn and Quarterly added that bit.
Oh, okay. I was going to mention that because we have just done a podcast episode about a comic book that you brought a musical accompaniment for.
Oh, yeah,
and
of course.
Here we have a big trade paperback that's got wine suggestions.
Yeah,
but that's somebody else who's added those. Okay,
I'm not a big wine drinker. Are you a wine drinker?
No, not at all. But I do like a book that comes with wine suggestions for each
Makes me
chapter.
want to try it every time. Wine always sounds great. It's a bit like coffee, isn't it? It always sounds amazing anecdotally, and you get to it and you think, that's a bit bitter. But there you go. Okay, cool. And the League of Comic Book Geeks said Campbell's version of an American comic book. And I thought, well, okay, I kind of dig that. If you read some of the interviews with Campbell, he talks about it being a version of Kirby's Thor, which may just be him playing with the interviewer, but I like to think that Campbell has read New Gods and Thor and these sort of Eternals and books like that, and I thought, I'm going to do my own version of this, so there's going to be loads of booze involved.
It certainly it deals with, we make mythology about gods and superpowered creatures, and we do it again with
it's our lives,
comic book characters. Yeah. This is a book about that without mentioning superheroes, other than him saying, I don't want to do superhero poses.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I often refer to New York as my Mecca to people. They go, why do you always go to New York? I say, well, it's Mecca to me. It's a religious experience, walking down the road where Marvel Comics was. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, let's go. Thank you for that, mate. That was enlightening and enriching, as always.
It's good fun. It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like I say, it's available digitally easily enough.
Yeah.
But the big omnibus or the omnibuy seem to be out of print now and getting harder to find.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, I mean, if you don't mind reading stuff on your iPad and you've got Kindle, or certainly if you've got Kindle Unlimited, get this on your subscription. And I think, let me just fill you in quickly, because also Alec from Hell, most of his stuff actually is there digitally. This Second Fake Death and the Fate of the Artist are all there as part of Kindle Unlimited. So
that is good. Oh, that's good news. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this also.
So you can tell Vince, because I think Vince is a Kindle Unlimited.
He loves a bargain. He
loves a
bargain.
bargain.
Yeah.
All this Eddie Campbell stuff is there.
Yeah, get him to give it a go. He might like that. Yeah. I think the thing is as well is it's one of those books. If you find a single issue of it at a comic mart or a comic convention, you just pick it up because there's you can just live in the bit of story. You don't need to have this like who knows who's done who's like killed who's battled who. You don't need to know that. You can just live in the moment of that little bit of story, which is why it works so well in the A1 books and stuff like that. I think.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thanks, man. Right, well, let's get on a little bit to you and talk about your many, many projects. You've just, last time, have I spoke to you since Enniskillen? I'm not sure I have.
Lawless.
Was Lawless?
I didn't get to Enniskillen this year.
Oh, didn't you? I thought you did. Sorry, my apologies, man. Yeah, I saw you before Lawless, didn't I?
Yeah, we met up before Lawless. That was the last time we saw each other, and we had a very nice, fancy coffee that came on a tile, so that was nice. We talked about comic books as ever, and shared pictures and images of Jack Kirby's work, as we always do. So I did Lawless this year, and there'll be Thought Bubble later in the year.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Anyone
at Thought Bubble you're looking forward to seeing this year?
Do you know? I've got no idea. I tell you who I'd like to see at Thought Bubble, Frank Miller. But
yes, me too. There you go. That ship, I believe, has sailed, my friend. But
afraid so, yeah.
That's a shame.
Doing that. There'll be the nice Bedford Con, or it's not called Nice anymore. They've changed the name.
Oh, it has changed its name, isn't it? Yeah. It's only up the road for me there. Well, it's only up the road for both of us, actually, isn't it? It's not far.
Yeah, it is very close. So we can get to that one. So we're doing that, and the book club, Mega City Book Club, continues to roll on every other week. Yeah,
I've been listening, man. I've been really enjoying it. So those that don't know, we're recording this on Sunday. This morning came out the one I did with you, with Dylan Dog, which you mentioned earlier, which is great fun.
Batman Dylan Dog, the best Batman comic of the year, and an introduction to Italian comics for me.
Cool. And also, I massively tried to stop you getting emails by saying why it was connected to the UK.
Yes, that's right. We try to work it into the Mega City Book Club rules that we have made up, but we're sort of sticking by.
But you still get emails about the So, but that was great fun, and again, that was another one where we just got into it. Did a load of research. It does. I don't know how you feel about it, but I find that researching these things changes my opinion of them, and I read them in different ways. But I enjoy it nevertheless.
Yeah. And hopefully doesn't change our opinion too much of the creators.
Yeah, that has happened, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah. Well, it's as we know, it's an almost daily problem at the moment for pop culture in general, is to find that one of the people that we sort of admired their work has become, not become, but has always been a shit.
It was something of a subject at Convention. We're not going to get into it here, but if you go to my blog, you'll see there's a link to a podcast. You can hear all about that.
I'm saying this in an entirely serious fashion, but I may not even be able to watch Strictly Come Dancing this year because it's now contaminated for me. But there you go.
One day you and I will have a podcast all about disconnecting the creator with the product. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. That's all I'll say about it. So some other great ones, though, talking about good people. You did the Bo Jeffries saga with the Don Richard Sheaf. That's a lovely episode, man. I love that episode. Yeah.
Well, we'd had a great day because Richard and I drove down together from London.
Of course you did. You were car buddies, weren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, for Lawless. And then we recorded an episode of the Mega City Book Club about the Bo Jeffries saga, which, of course, is another Alan Moore, probably Alan Moore's funniest ever comic.
Yeah, I agree.
And Richard Sheaf, always great fun. And, of course, when I picked him up in London, I got to actually step into his office.
The room, did you? Yeah.
The room, yes, which is crammed to the rafters with British comics and reference books and artwork.
So good.
And, amazing.
Yeah, we had a little plan up at the Comic Mart. We had a little plan about doing something, which I really got to pull my finger out on. But, I love Richard. Yeah, he's such a good guy. And the best bloke to walk around a British comics art exhibition with ever. Because I go, what about this? Oh, look at this. It's like that. That was a great one. And I think Bo Jeffries and DR and Quinch vie for the funniest for me.
Right.
So I think Bo Jeffries has got it because, it's more of a recent thing. I read it for an episode with Alan. I think Bo Jeffries has got the crown for me at the moment. But I do like DR and Quinch. I do think. And I think Alan Moore gets mistaken for being this grim and gritty, serious character, but he's quite fucking funny.
He's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yes, he is hilarious.
Yeah.
And those are both great comics. So we did that.
Good. And then this is the beauty of the podcast, especially yours, is a comic book that massively passed me by. I probably flicked through a page or two here, was Junker, which you did with Rob Ellis.
Yes.
And suddenly I want to read it. I'm like, I was walking the dog whilst listening to your podcast. I think, right now I need to read this book. Yeah.
Well, that's got Junker is a 2000 AD comic from the early 90s that's got artwork by John Ridgway, who, like Eddie Campbell, probably works better in black and white than he does in colour, which he's doing in Junker. And it's got this reputation as being one of the worst stories that 2000 AD ever did. It was written by a Michael Fleischer, an American writer who is so eccentric that Harlan Ellison called him a lunatic.
I know. I sent you the cover to that book, that novel I've got of his, which is kind of a diatribe on anti-feminism. And you don't know this story, but when I think I took the picture of the front of the book and sent it to you. But I took a picture also of the back spiel of it, and I almost sent you that, and I thought, no, I don't want Eamonn thinking I've got that book in my house. If he reads that, it's so awful. Was it called Reading Harry? Or I can't remember the name of it now. I've got it somewhere.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Rob Ellis came on to talk about Junker, which I also recorded at the Lawless Convention in Bristol. Yeah. And I
think I've met Rob, hasn't he? Is he the guy with the brother?
Yes, they're a pair of twins, and now they've both been on the book club. And it was great because he's so passionate about the artwork. When he was young, he'd had this very nice, supportive interaction and exchange of letters with John Ridgway.
Nice.
So he's got this real sort of connection to the creator. And it was actually on the ACP Slack that somebody suggested, Eamonn should do a series of covering bad comics.
Ah, okay. Right.
So anyway, we did Junker. That was fantastic. And Rob Ellis is going to come back again next year. And do something different. Yeah.
Oh, good stuff. Yeah, that was a good one. And then again, putting yourself through it. The last one I was going to mention is you and Conrad, your buddy Conrad, and I love Conrad. He's such a good guy. Did Madam Web. Mate, I tried to watch that on a plane back from America recently, and I couldn't do it.
It's such a bad film, Madame Web. Sony, what are you doing with this tangled Spider-Verse that you've got? But yes, Conrad and I had to, when he was over living in the same town as me, we used to go and see all the comic book movies together, and we would podcast about them. And so we did Madame Web and Mad Max Furiosa.
Yeah.
But we also do these occasional film clubs where we will cover older films that are somehow related to 2000 AD.
Okay.
And we've got some more of those coming up.
You did one with Troy, didn't you? I got to finally meet Troy.
We did one with Troy. He's a nice guy. He did E.T. and we did the Tom Selleck Runaway film.
Love that film. I forgot it had that lady from Cheers in it. I forgot that. We were chatting about this the other day.
Yes. She plays the villainess Kirstie Alley.
That's it.
And you and I could... Listeners, the other thing that Tony and I exchange WhatsApps about is not just comic book art, but it's also weird conspiracy theories that we're fascinated.
We've had some crackers,
And you let me know when we were talking about Tom Selleck in Runaway, the conspiracy theory that Tom Selleck is transgender. And
it wasn't my conspiracy theory.
I know it's not your conspiracy. No, none of these are brought up by us. But these like weird. This nonsense conspiracy theories. I perhaps we should stay away from that.
It's got like a moustache, like a brush that you brush the yard with. But apparently,
Okay.
I found my original book that I read. I think I read it far too young, of the novelisation that Magnum was based on.
Right. Okay.
Quite saucy, surprisingly saucy, Eamonn.
Yeah. Okay.
Far too much for 12-year-old me, or wherever I was. Then, but,
Tom Selleck as Magnum PI was far too much for me on the telly. Honestly, the butchest person you've ever seen wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Absolutely.
Interesting.
But he was in that film Runaway. So we do occasionally, and we've got some other 2000 AD related films. That was Troy, who you've now met, and he's on the ACP Slack.
Yeah,
and he's a good guy.
Good chap. Interestingly, a quick Tom Selleck anecdote. If you watch Blue Bloods, which I have not, this would be the only reason I'd watch it instantly, is the pictures that inhabit Tom Selleck's office, flat, and a number of other people's were done by my buddy Adrian Hashimi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is an interesting source of revenue that he has for his art, where it gets used by TV studios to put in the backgrounds.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take that check. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, good stuff. He's top geezer. Look him up. Good stuff, mate. So where can people find you? And what about your TV Invaders podcast? What have you got coming up on that one?
So British Invaders, we're in the middle of a documentary by James Burke called After the Warming. We've got the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell show coming up. We've got The Borrowers coming up. We've got some, I forget what we've got coming up. British Invaders, the home of the podcast, all about British science fiction television, where we do all sorts of fantasy, genre and horror shows.
Yeah. There's many forgotten a story, aren't there?
Many forgotten shows. And coming up at Christmas, we'll be doing, I think at Christmas, we finally get, this year, we get to the Mark Gatiss more recent Dracula? Ghost stories for Christmas. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, Dracula by Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat will be coming up at some point. But no, we're doing the ghost stories for Christmas. They've started that he's done over the last few years. So yeah, that's British Invaders. Megacitybookclub.com for the book club.
What have you got coming up on that, man?
Well, yes, Scream. We've got 40 years of Scream, the
nice.
hardback collection, where they basically just printed all 15 issues of the 1984 Scream comic, which is lovely.
Yeah.
So I've got an episode about that in 2 weeks' time. Then after that, my friend John Hymas has done one of those sort of, it's called The Ultimate Book of British Comics. It's one of those sort of collective books where somebody tries to cover all of a history of British comics in one volume.
Yeah.
So talking about that.
It needs doing, man, doesn't it? I think the, whatever you call it, memory, the not the industrial memory, but whatever they call it, the memory of British comics is slowly leaking away, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Oh, good.
And then in the coming months, we'll be doing some Razorjack with Michael Carroll.
Wow, comics.
We'll be doing Punisher Max. I'll get emails about that. We're going to be talking about some more Garth Ennis. And I've got some Roy of the Rovers coming up as well.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. I like Roy of the Rovers. Roy of the Rovers is one of those comics as a kid that you could just read it and not worry about it. And
exactly.
I liked it. Yeah, it was good. Yeah. Oh, good stuff, man. And where can we find you online? Where are your various socials?
BritishInvaders.com, megacitybookclub.com. The book club is on all the social media networks apart from Threads. Apart from Twitter. That's the one. Yeah, Twitter's the horrible one. We're on Threads, but we don't like Twitter, so we're not on that anymore.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff, man. And you can also find you on the Slack. You're on the ACP Slack.
Come and talk to me on the ACP Slack, especially if you want to come on the book club and talk about an obscure comic, preferably a British one, but we take anything with a British connection. And also come by the Slack if you want to hear about, I don't know, recent Kickstarters from Tribute Press. Flesh and Ink is in my hands literally at this moment. It's on my desk here.
What was the phrase I used? I am incredibly sorry.
You're very sorry. You're very, very sorry. Yes. If you want to know about a comic book publisher who's living above...
a strip club that is basically near me. So that pub was on the walk that I used to do during lockdown. That's where the pictures come from of that pub.
Right.
Yeah. It used to be a stripper pub. No, it's not. I think they hire out tractors and things, which is a bit of a shame.
It's not run by Satanists then? Definitely.
No, Attacks by Satanists, run by someone slimly... I've told him it's based on Pat Mills.
Right, okay. But yeah, go to check out the ACP Slack. It's a good place to go and chat about comics. There's a very useful advice channel where you get really high quality advice from people who know what they're talking about, but don't show it off. They do it in a helpful fashion.
Yeah, different opinions, but not argued about as well on there, which I kind of like. Yeah, good stuff. That's what we need. Thank you, mate. You can find me, neveronanything.com. There's a weekly column I call Tops and Bottoms, where I ramble on about something or other, and then I talk about my favourite read of the week and my least favourite read of the week. I've just added a section to that, which is Small Press Book of the Week. So mostly I did it because my mate had a book out, but that'll be continuing. The Awesome Comics podcast continues on comes out every Monday, usually about 11:30, and this week we have a sort of few questions that we're talking about, but this week we're tackling the question, when is pushing your comic onto people too much? Which comes from 3 English blokes. So the Americans may have a different opinion on that one. But when is emailing, when can I come on your podcast, too much? That's one of the questions I'll be tackling. Also, don't knock on someone's door if they buy a comic from you, which is another. Have you had that experience yet?
No.
I had that once where I bought a comic and the bloke travelled to my house and knocked on the door and tried to give it to me. I'm like, okay, thank you, good.
We've both had emails from people.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
We got a load of those. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thank you, mate.
Thank you, Tony.
And we'll continue chatting about something else, I'm sure. But thanks for coming on, mate. It's a really, really fun one.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Let's go to the pub.